Well, good afternoon. I sent both of you a link that should bring you right to the session as we're speaking now. So I hope that you're able to use it and that you're able to join in the lecture and ask questions as we go along here this evening, or late this afternoon and early evening. If you are unable to join, I will have the lecture uploaded tomorrow about 9:30 in the morning and to week 5. So tonight this afternoon, we're going to discuss chapters 10, 11, present chapters 10, 11, chapter 10, conflict and negotiation, and then chapter 11, communication and collaboration, although we will probably spend more time on the communication aspect as opposed to collaboration. Not to say that collaboration is not important, it is. The text just spends a little bit more time on communication. And of course, if you don't communicate, you can't collaborate. So here we are with chapter 10, conflict and negotiation. Don't forget the power of yes. And we hope to answer these questions as we go through the course this evening. What is the nature of conflict in organizations? How can conflict be managed? What's the nature of negotiation in organizations? And then what are the alternative strategies for negotiation? Very important topics, and I think you'll enjoy this chapter as we go through it. Pardon me. What's the nature of conflict in organizations? Well, I think the best thing to say is, and we can look here on the slide, is that the conflicts occur whenever there's some type of disagreement. The disagreement can be substantive, as is listed below, or emotional. And so what happens when we have these disagreements, it causes some type of friction. Friction is going to cause us to do something one way or the other. Hopefully it's positive, but not always. Now, if we have a substantive conflict, that's where we have a real disagreement. I use the word real as opposed to fundamental. Fundamental is okay. It's just I prefer real. Over ends or goals and how they're to be achieved, and whether or not they can be accomplished, should be accomplished, well, you can take these goals and objectives on in the first place. Now, to me, those are issues things. So we're having a disagreement over issues. We get to the one below, it's emotional, and there are no issues here. Now, I'm going to explain that in a second when I say there's no issues. Obviously, what are you talking about? There has to be an issue. Well, yes and no. So emotional can be over lots of things. It can be, pardon me, anger, fear. We don't like somebody. We don't trust somebody. All sorts of things. And as the book points out, how many times have you heard people say, I don't like to work with him, or I can't get anything done with her, all this sort of stuff. And we need to think about what happens in emotional. And emotional doesn't come down to issues other than the issues of don't trust somebody, have anger with this person, we're afraid of this person, we don't get along with this person, whatever it happens to be. I'm not dismissing that those are not issues, but they're not substantive issues. They're not issues that we can negotiate about. This is internal. And until we figure out how to fix the internal part, we're always going to have this, and that's going to be a barrier to anything we want to do. And this is something that comes from Oliver Wendell Holmes. I believe that this is the author, Oliver Wendell Holmes, as opposed to his son, Supreme Court Justice Holmes. And he says here, and I want to read this to you because it's important that we read it and think about what it has to say. If I had a formula for bypassing trouble, I would not pass it around. Trouble creates a capacity to handle it. Think about that. Trouble creates a capacity to handle it. I don't embrace trouble. That's as bad as treating it as an enemy. But I do say, meet it as a friend. And then you'll see a lot of it and had better be on speaking terms with it. Which means, in a way, we can get over this thing once we understand what's going on. Now, there are, as the text points out, or the authors of the text point out, 4 different types, 4 levels of conflict in organizations. You can see this depicted at the top of page 221. Interpersonal, intrapersonal, intergroup, and then interorganizational. Pardon me. Excuse me just a second. I just lost my train of thought. Interpersonal is between 2 people. The slide here says it's a rivalry. And, you know, people may not look at it as a rivalry, but it probably is. Maybe they may be competing over scarce resources, etc., and trying to figure out who's going to get the larger piece of the pie. Now, we'll get to that when we get to negotiation a little bit later, but that's part of it. Second thing is, hello, is anybody on?
Hello.
Hello, Mr. White. How are you?
Fine, sir, and yourself?
Okay. Well, we just got started here. We're chapter 10, levels of conflict in organizations. You can either ask me a question on the phone, or you can type it into the chat there, and you should have that, and then send it to me.
Yes, sir.
Interpersonal, that's within the individual. Intergroup, again, we got back. This is kind of like we talked about in the first one, except this is between people in a group, intergroup, and you know, resources and problems of that nature. And then interorganizational is a competition in the marketplace. Now, we talked about conflict earlier, and we talked about it being substantive, or we talked about it being emotional. And this is a little bit different wording here, but don't be confused over it. Functional conflict is constructive. And by the way, we'll get to a slide here, a graphic in the text there in a second. Is substantive. It can be positive and be beneficial for a great number of reasons, which we'll talk about in just a second. Dysfunctional is exactly what it says. It is destructive. It is usually destructive to the person who begins it, and it's destructive to the person who is interacting with that person. You don't get anything done with destructive conflict. Excuse me just a second. Thank you. I've had a little bit of a cold. My throat's kind of dry. Now, here we can see this on page 222 in the text at the bottom, figure 10.1, functional and dysfunctional conflict. We can see that, according to the slide, according to the authors, that moderate levels of conflict are constructive. And then when we have the negative, too much or too little conflict is destructive, and it doesn't help us anywhere. So we can see what the impact on performance is. We have moderate conflict. Now remember here, we're talking about moderate conflict. We're not talking about emotional conflict. Remember, emotional conflict is a barrier. Emotional conflict comes from within. We can't stand to work with this person. We never get along with this person. We don't trust this person, etc. That comes down to, we call it emotional, but it's also dysfunctional. We can't get past that barrier. Substantive conflict or functional conflict is where we can get past that barrier, and we're talking about the merits of the issue in front of us. And this next slide, I think, will point this out fairly well. Potential benefits of functional or constructive conflict can stimulate conversation, bring more information in, that's going to help with the decision-making process. Notice the last bullet down here, provides an opportunity for creativity. This is when we're still focused on the issue or issues at hand, but we are in conflict with each other as to what they may mean, where we want to go with them, or things of that nature. But we're focusing here on issues and not, pardon me, and not personalities. And that's why you can do things in a positive manner with functional conflict. Dysfunctional conflict there's nothing to be done. There's nothing that can get done here with this type of situation. I like to talk about it distorting vision. Cripples or ruins relationships, increases emotions and negativity, and it decreases a sense of purpose and input, which leads to an overall loss. So I think the biggest bullet that we can look at, if you want to look at this slide and get something from the slide itself besides what I had to say, is the one that's halfway down. Creates a negative environment. And just think to yourself, how often have I ever been able to accomplish anything when there's all this negativity flowing around? Very little at all, because if the people who are in this conflict are negative, or they're the ones that are creating the negativity, they're not going to be able to see past their boundaries, whatever those boundaries happen to be, and therefore we're not going to be able to move the ball down the field, if you will. Well, this is something we have to think about: culture and conflict. We have to be careful about other people's cultures when we are working with them. And it's an issue that requires a great deal of sensitivity. We have to value other people's culture and what they bring to the table. And conversely, they have to value what we bring to the table. So this is the thing of learning from each other, and moving forward, instead of using culture as continual barriers. We don't understand them; they don't understand us. How can we move forward? And so we need to pay attention to this. And we know we know that the barriers are there, and we talk about them all the time: race, creed, national origin, etc. So it's not something that we are unaware of. We know that. We just have to make sure that we do things that diminish this. I don't think we can ever say that cultural differences, I'm not talking about conflict, cultural differences are never going to go away. Maybe after a family, I'm going to use it this way, moves to the United States, maybe after 5 or 6 generations, that their culture, their hold on to that old culture will disappear to some extent. In some cases, it will never disappear. And it won't disappear in many cases because someone else or someone else's will not let that disappear. And that happens usually by from skin color. I hate to have to say that, but that's a fact of life. But we need to move beyond that. We need to look at what people bring to the table, as opposed to where they came from, or what their particular culture is, or things of that nature. Conflict resolution. This is where we get to the issue that's at hand, and we find out what the underlying causes of this conflict is. And if we can remove that, then we find out the conflict's going to disappear. Now, what I'm talking about here in this particular case is conflict being a barrier, as opposed to being something we can work through. Conflict here being a barrier. And once we can, now this is specifically talking about destructive conflict. Once we get past that barrier, then we can move on and do other things. Now, this next slide talks to us about the stages of conflict. It's figure 10.2 in your text, and you can find that on top of page 225. We begin on the left-hand side with antecedent conditions. This is what sets the conflict in motion, if you will. We move to perceived conflict, which may be substantive, which we talked about at the beginning of this hour, or it could be emotional, and that's when these are sensed. Now remember, perception does not mean that that's what's real, although as we know, the old adage tends to hold true that perception is reality. Now we need to think about that. And we moved from that stage, the perceived conflict, to the felt conflict. In other words, we can sense this. We can sense it with our eyes, with hearing, by touch, or something of that nature. And this, and the term that's used, the word that's used at the bottom, tension has been created, and it's going to cause us, motivate us to act. Pardon me. And then we get to the manifest conflict end, which is over here on the bottom right-hand side. And this is addressed by what's known as the conflict resolution or suppression. Now, I want to stop here. I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, this last term that I mentioned, suppression. If we suppress the conflict, nothing has been resolved. All that we're doing now is putting this conflict into a sense of suspended animation. And if we don't address the underlying problems of the conflict, and we only suspend it, it will eventually bubble up again and come back and bite us in places we don't want to be bitten. Because all we did was we said, okay, well, we're going to cover this over and we're going to make nice, my term. And we've not done anything. We just continued. What we're actually doing is we're saying, okay, there's an 800-pound gorilla in the room, but we're going to ignore him or her. Well, mostly him, because females don't get that large, or males don't get to 800 pounds, and some of them do get to 500 pounds. So we've got this gorilla in the room, and we just say, well, I got to pay attention to that. That doesn't do us any good. So we have to get to the point of getting away from this suppression and stay away from that. That's just a bad tactic. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about that slide we just saw. This is the conflict antecedents, and it establishes conditions. It's the starting point, and it can be just exactly as we've said before, substantive, emotional, or other ones. Then we move to what we talked about second, which was the perceived conflict. And this is where they become the basis of either substantive or emotional. And then they have a demarcation between individuals and or groups. And again, the felt is what we sense. It's what we have. And now this is galvanizing us to action. We have to do something. And then we come here to the manifest conflict. Notice here that we admit that the gorilla's in the room. And again, I don't want to take too much away from the suppression, because we'll get to this again in a second. And if we get to a conflict aftermath, is what's seen here, is we've either exposed or removed or corrected the things that brought us to where we are. And then we come down to the last thing that I've talked about before, and I want to repeat it. This is this conflict suppression. If you notice down here at the bottom, the last bullet, it said there has been no change. We haven't fixed anything. All we've done is said, well, okay, we're just going to cover this over and come back to it some other time. What did we fix? Nothing. And it may come back and be worse the next time around than it is today. Instead of trying to handle something, we've just passed it off. Now, these are the different types of conflict we can find in organizations. Really don't think we need to spend a good deal of time on this because they're all fairly self-explanatory. You can see this, some of this slide and figure 10.3 and types of conflict that are mentioned there, functional teams. Vertical usually tends to be between the individual and his or her supervisor or manager. Horizontal is normally between two people who are peers. They may not be working at the same job, but they have the same level. Two middle managers, for instance, or maybe even two senior managers, two senior executives. So that's the analogy that I want to use there. And then the last is between line and staff. And this is something that is always around. It's never going to go away, at least as far as I know. I don't know if you've been in this situation or not. But this is where the staff people are called in by the line people to help solve a particular problem because the staff people have the expertise. And so the staff people will say, okay, this is what you should do. And the line people say, well, we've tried that and it doesn't work. And the staff people will say, well, it does work. We know it works. We're the experts and you have to do it this way. And the line people say, no, you don't understand. We've already tried that. It doesn't work. And we're not going to do that again because we know better. So this is a continual type thing because even though the staff people may have the expertise, they have no authority to tell line people what to do. They can show them what to do. They can give them the best advice that they possibly can. They can give them all the type of advice and wording and best practices and things of that nature, but they can't tell those people what to do. Now, what I have seen happen many times in my experience or experiences is that the staff people will come down and they'll say this is what has to be done because they have all this knowledge, and when they go back to their office or offices or cubby hole or wherever it happens to be, they could do this stuff themselves and it'll work. Well, the problem is there usually tends to be a loss in translation between what it is the line people actually need and what the staff people think they need. And so this is a conflict that is ongoing, and I don't think it'll ever be solved. I would hope that it would be, but I doubt that it will be. This next area is something that we need to think about a good deal, and we don't always think about. We have role ambiguity conflicts, and this can be any number of things that could cause this. And it's when task expectations are either unclear or they don't mesh with what we think should be. And so we think we should be doing one thing, the task requires us to do something else, and we have this conflict in ourselves. It's an intrapersonal conflict between what it is and what it should be. Then we have things like task and workflow interdependencies. This is just simply saying where people are tied together. One depends upon the other. Think of this as an assembly line in a way, and you're putting something into, we'll use an automobile, and you have to do your piece correctly because the person who's down the line from you, next person to do something to the car, depends upon you doing whatever it is you're supposed to do correctly. If you don't do it correctly, then this person can't do his or her job, and we have all kinds of problems. So that's task interdependency. The tasks may be separate, but they are interdependent on each other to come up with the whole that you want. Hello, Mr. Huff. Domain ambiguities occur when we don't have the right direction. Goals are ambiguous. They've not been clearly articulated. Or they have been articulated, but somebody doesn't understand them well enough. There could be a language barrier. Could be some other type issue. So we have these problems down at the bottom. Next, we come to two other things that can really cause a lot of problems. And we have to realize the first one is something that is an everyday fact of life, and that's resource scarcity. Scarcity. There are only so many resources to go around. Pardon me a second. And everybody can't get everything he or she needs. And if a person is able to get everything that he or she needs, then there's somebody else that's not going to get what he or she needs. So we have resource scarcities, and we have a problem with that. And this can cause some angst in working relationships. Power or value asymmetry. So asymmetry just means something's not meshing correctly. And so we have these kinds of problems as well. Pardon me. Now, one of the things that we have to be able to do is we have to be able to have somewhat known as indirect strategies of managing conflict. Now, indirect means that it's obviously somebody is not going directly to the other person in conflict and saying something has to happen. So here are some measures. You can see these on page 227 and part of 228. And notice a couple things here we want to talk about. The first one it's mentioned here is decoupling. It would take when resolution between parties is difficult to achieve. Decoupling is exactly what it means. We're going to unhitch the problem. We're going to cause some separation so we can get to the crux of the matter. We have buffering, and we have changes is another approach that could be used when inputs of one team are the outputs of another. So we're going to try to change that strategy. Then we have a thing called appealing to common goals. Here we're focusing on objectives as opposed to individuals. And we all want to reach this one end state to achieve the goals or the objectives, or perhaps earn the reward or bonus that we think is coming to us. And so we get rid of that emotional piece, my term here, and focus on the end state. One of the next strategies we have, or another strategy we have, is upward referral. It's pretty simple. We're just going to kick the can up to the next highest level and let that person up there solve the problem for us. Now, there should be, if you're thinking about this, there should be an inherent problem to that. And that is, you should try to handle your own problems and not get somebody else to handle them for you, because the solution that they give or maybe the solution they impose may not be palatable. So you have to remember, if you bring an outside person in who's superior to the people in the conflict, whatever is resolved It may not be to the liking of either party in a conflict. And then altering scripts and myths. Notice the first word that comes here. This is superficial because we're kind of changing the story. And we're taking away, and then it goes back into organizational culture and things of that nature. So really, we've not answered anything here. We've just changed the story to make it more palatable. Now, the next slide we come to, which is not the easiest to see here as I have it on my screen here. These are the direct conflict management strategies. You can see this this particular slide, figure 10.4, in your text on page 229. And it goes from cooperative on the left-hand side to uncooperative and then unassertive to assertive over on the right. And you can see these various ones that we have. And then we're going to talk about these in various other types of scenarios as they come out. Lose-lose conflict, nobody's going to win here. Everything that we started out with is still around. Nothing's been solved. And these type of strategies, as you can look at the slide in your, the figure in your textbook, pardon me, avoidance, accommodation, and compromise, all fall into that category. Now, I want to talk here just a second about compromise. We usually think compromise is good. And I'm not here to say compromise is not good. What I am here to say about compromise is that somebody is giving up something that they value. Both sides normally do this. And therefore, there's a loss there, and we have to look at it like that. I've given up something that I've valued. I don't have that anymore. I traded that to get something else that I might also value, but I've lost something of equal value. So we have to be concerned about that. Win-lose, obviously this is what it is. One person has dominance over the other. I'm just talking about two people in conflict here. One team over another, etc. And pardon me. Notice the strategies here are competition and then authoritative command. Authoritative command, we understand that. That's the person in charge. He or she says this is what's going to be done, step down, next case. We're not going to talk about it anymore. But when you have competition, that's exactly what it means. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. Obviously, we want to get to win-win conflict. And what we find here, the tactic that works best, and the only one that works best, is collaboration. That's where we get together. We understand there's something amiss, and we intend to fix it. Everybody understands that. Notice it talks about getting together and using problem-solving techniques to make choices. And everybody is in this together. So we figured that's the best way to move forward. We can't move forward any other way. And parties should always strive to achieve this. Doesn't always happen, but that's what should happen. This is just a particular question that's posed to you. Think of a conflict you have with a coworker. Was it handled directly or indirectly? Was it resolved? Think about whatever technique was used to resolve it, if it was. And has the conflict reappeared? Now, negotiation. This is where we're going to make a decision, making process invoking interdependent parties with different wants. And we have to figure that out. We have what are known as substance goals, such as salary, working condition, and we have relationship goals. can we continue once we have reached a deal? So these are both intertwined, if you will, in this negotiation process. One is something that we're debating about. I use the examples of salary or working conditions. And then the next thing is, once we've solved that substance issue, are we going to be able to work together? Are our relationships going to continue to be where they have been in the past? These are effective negotiation factors: quality, harmony, and efficiency. Quality, as far as I'm concerned, boils down to win-win. We want every person to come away from the conflict or from the negotiation table to fully understand what happened, and that he or she is coming out ahead of where they were at the beginning. Harmony, this is the needed lubrication, if you will, that keeps good personal relationships going during the negotiation period. It's lubrication, it's oil, or it's grease, whatever you want to look at, or whatever term you want to use as an analogy to keep this flowing and making it good. And then efficiency, this simply means not wasting resources. And resources here are not just money, but time is considered to be a resource. So you stay focused on issues and the issue that is at hand, as opposed to some peripheral issue that doesn't mean much. Is it important? Is it more important to focus on issues than in the room in which the negotiation is being conducted? Obviously, you don't want to be in some place that's a pigsty, for instance, but if that's the only place you can be to negotiate, don't let that hamper the negotiation. Stay focused on the issues. Ethical considerations are always important because if they're not considered, that can cause problems down the road. This notice here, this desire to get more than the other person. And they may know there's insufficient resources, and so they will do things by hook or by crook. That will come back to haunt somebody in further negotiations, because if this person or persons get away with this unethical behavior, the next time they sit down and negotiate with the same people or the same set of people, someone's going to say, well, we can't trust this guy or gal. So it's going to cause a lot of problems. The nature of negotiation, pretty much kind of what we've talked about in the past in some respects. Two-party negotiation, that's direct, person to person. Group negotiation, manager, part of the team, he or she does part of that negotiation. Intergroup, and then constituency negotiation, couldn't get it out right, constituency negotiations. Each party is represented by someone else within that constituency. Labor management negotiations at work, there's usually a team for management that negotiates, represents all of management, and then a team from a union would be negotiating for the workers. Some of those people may actually be workers, and some of them may not be. Pardon me. Now, there are two types of negotiation, as the text points out: distributive negotiation and integrative negotiation. Notice that the distributive on the left-hand side focuses on positions that have been staked out by those in the conflict, and it doesn't focus on anything else. Whereas integrative negotiation, and as the slide says, sometimes called principal negotiation, focuses on the issues that are to be discussed and the merits of each of those issues. And so this is not where somebody has staked out a position and said, okay, this is my position, and I'm not going to move from it. The other one is talking about what are the issues, what is it we have to get to, how do we get to that, et cetera, and staying focused on that as opposed to it's my way or the highway, which we too often see in conflict and negotiation. The next slide talks about the bargaining zone. You can see the bargaining zone depicted in your text, the figure 10.5 at the bottom of page 233. And this is an interesting thing to talk about because we have to think about this. And the bargaining zone is an area where people will come to an agreement. So notice what the slide says here. It's very important to think about this. It's the range between one party's minimum reservation point and the other party's maximum reservation point. And so if you look at the slide, if you look at figure 10.5 in your text, it talks about an employer's initial offer, and then the graduate's minimum reservation point, the employer's maximum reservation point, and then the initial offer from the graduate. So it's an area where I'm going to start at this point, you're going to start at that point. You may not always know that, and we understand that neither of us is going to accept the extremes, minimum or maximum. We're going to meet someplace in the middle. If you've ever bought a house and gone through a realtor, usually there's some type of negotiation. The person selling the house wants $200,000 for the house, and you don't want to offer that much. So you'll offer what you think they might take, understanding that that person who's selling the house are probably going to reject that offer and come someplace to where you're comfortable. So you offer $190,000, and you think, well, this guy's going to come down and split the difference with me and make it $195,000, and I'm going to accept that. That's the same type of thing. I want to just for a second, I apologize for doing this. I want to go back to this distributive negotiation because I skipped over it. I didn't mean to do that. We have two kinds. We have hard. That's where you try to get dominance and usually results in an impasse. The soft is known as a give-in position, if you will. It usually results in dissatisfaction. One party simply gives in, just says, I'm really tired of this negotiation. I want to get this thing over with, so I'll agree to something. And it doesn't necessarily solve any issues. It can be just as bad as complete dominance. Now this is the integrative negotiation, taking a little bit further than what we've done before. Notice it's non-confrontational. How this talks about here. How can we get to the best answer? We don't want to be confronting each other. We're here to work together to reach some kind of negotiated settlement where everybody's going to come out being a winner. We look at every alternative and try to come to an agreement on the alternatives. And last, we're trying to achieve the win-win scenario. Foundations of integrative negotiation are based on attitudes, behaviors, and information. Attitude is a willingness to trust. We're going to trust the other people. We're going to share whatever information we have. And notice the next question, the next statement. We're going to ask concrete questions, and we expect concrete answers. In the behavioral aspect of this, notice the first thing, and I think it's most important thing on this slide. We're going to separate people from the issue. We're not going to talk about personalities. We're not going to talk about people. We're not going to say, well, you guys did this the last time, or you guys did that the last time. We're going to focus on the issues that faces us. We're going to stay away from premature judgments. And we're going to finally, ultimately, I think maybe the second biggest piece on this slide is we're going to evaluate the alternatives that are presented by a set of defined criteria. We're not going to do something just because it's a feel-good answer. We're going to find out if this actually has some substance to it. Informational, this just means we have all the information we need to have, and if we don't have all of it, we're willing to get it. Everybody has to understand and identify personal interest in a situation. So if it boils down to personality, we have to know that. Excuse me a second. Each party has to know what it really wants, and they must understand the relative importance of the other party's interests. It's very important. If we don't do that, we're probably going to have big time problems. This is some common negotiating pitfalls. Notice what it says here. The misconception of the fixed pie. Nothing could. Everything is just the way it is. We can't change the pie at all. Now, that may fly in the face of what we talked about before about being scarce resources, but there are ways to enlarge the pie, and that's what people ought to look for. Excuse me. Escalating commitment. We always have to be careful about escalating commitment. We talked about that last week. We have to make sure that we're not continuing to do things just because. We have to decide whether we're going to fish or cut bait. Overconfidence, we really have to be careful about that. This is the feeling that your position is better than the other party's position. If you don't understand the merits of not only your position but their position, there's going to be trouble. And then last here, this gets to communication. There's too much telling, not enough active listening. You have to listen to what people are saying to you and try to get that in your mind and pay attention. Last, we come to third-party negotiations. There's two different types. There's arbitration and mediation. As a neutral third party who comes in to, do something with the negotiation. If he or she is an arbitrator, that person, the arbitrator, has been agreed upon by both sides in the conflict, and he or she renders a decision that is final. Both parties have agreed to the arbitrator, and they have agreed that his or her answer is final. You see this quite often in baseball contracts where somebody is they go in and the team is offered X number of dollars, and the player says he wants X number of dollars, and they sit down and go before an arbitrator, and the arbitrator sets a figure. Normally speaking, neither the baseball club nor the player want to go to arbitration because somebody is going to be dissatisfied with the outcome. A mediator, on the other hand, is a third party who comes in, and his or her primary purpose is to keep negotiations going. They will go back and forth between the parties, supposedly if they're separated in different areas, and bring back, well, this is what they'll do, this is what they'll do, and try to get them to come to some type of an agreement. The mediator has no authority to impose a final settlement. And mediation is something that the federal government has. There are people who are trained as mediators, and they usually go out and meet with various people for negotiation and try to keep their thing is to let's keep this thing moving. Let's try to talk about things. What can we do to solve the issue? No authority to end the situation, to end the conflict and the negotiation with an imposed settlement. That brings us to the end of chapter 10. Either of you have any questions?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. I'd like to take a couple minute break here. It's about 5:22. It's almost 5:23. So we'll come back at 5:28 and begin chapter 11, communication and collaboration. By the way, while I'm gone here for a second, if you want to type a question, you can. I'll be glad to answer that when I get back. Come back at 5:28. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, it's 5:28. We're back. Before we go on, I want to thank each of you for joining tonight. And I still will upload this tomorrow in case you want to review some of what we discussed here this evening. Chapter 11, communication and collaboration. Although, as I mentioned earlier, we'll probably spend a little more time talking about communication than collaboration. Communication is the lifeblood of any organization, and we have to pay attention to what we say and how we say it. So we hope to answer a question about what is communication, what are the issues in interpersonal communication, what's the nature of communication in organizations, and finally, how can we build more collaborative work environments? Well, communication is simply, if you want to boil it down to what I have to say here, is we tell someone else or someone else's, depending upon how we're communicating, something in various ways. And when we say something, there is always a meaning attached to what it is that we say. It may not be as important all the time as it is other times, but we still have some type of meaning attached to the things that we say. Now, this is the classical figure. I like to use the word classical figure that you can see at the bottom of page 242, figure 11.1. We have the source, which in this particular case, if you'll take it from what's going on here, I'm the communicator, and you gentlemen are listening to what I have to say. And I am encoding, as it says here on the left side of the screen, some type of message. It is going through a channel. Now, the channel here is our computer system. It's going through my computer system here at the office to your computer systems. That's the channel that we're using. This is, in a way, like face-to-face communication, but it's different. Hopefully you can see my image, not that that's all so great and wonderful, but that you can see me speaking. The disadvantage that I have is that I cannot see either of you. And so what happens here is one of you may have a facial expression about something I say, and you may be looking for clarification, and I can't see that quizzical look on your face, and so I can't come back and answer that. And then the receiver, which in this case is you gentlemen, will decode what's being said, make some meaning out of it, and get to perceive meaning. And then if we do this thing correctly, you'll send me some feedback. Now, whether you do it tonight via this chat down here, or ask me some questions, or you send it to me by email sometime later, or you allude to it in things that you post on Campus Web, that's some type of feedback. And so one of the feedbacks that I want to get from you, and by the way, you may want to wait till the course is over until you receive a grade, although it won't make any difference to me. You may feel more comfortable about that. Give me some feedback on what you get out of these lectures that I go through, and how helpful they are to you, what you would like to see improved, what you would like to see eliminated, things of that nature. That helps me improve. Hopefully it helps you improve in a way because you understand some of the concepts we're going through, and you can gather them in and take them in and then put meaning to them. One of the problems that we have, and we'll talk about this as we go on, is this little box down here in the middle. It's called noise. And that's any type of distraction. It can be anything that causes either the sender, in this case me, or the receiver, you gentlemen, from having some problem with the message. So it could be any, I guess I say anything, it could be just regular noise. It could be physical distractions. Notice it could be cultural differences. It could be status effects. And this is something we want to make sure that does not exist. Status effects in this case would be me as the instructor supposedly having all the knowledge about this and you gentlemen wanting to learn about it. So we want to break that barrier down and make sure that what I'm saying to you, you understand, and what you think you understand, but you're not sure about, we articulate with each other so we have a common understanding of what's being said. Now, we're just going to go back over this just a little bit. Sources is the person sending the message. Receiver, people on the other end of the line are listening. And then again, the noise factor. Now, this next slide we're going to talk about are the communication channels. And by the way, we'll see this again a little bit later in this chapter, and we'll talk to it again a little bit later in this chapter. But these are the ones we use. Normally. There may be some other ones here. Obviously, there are some people in the world who are not as sophisticated as we in the United States are, or other countries, and they will communicate with drums or smoke signals or something else that lets them know what they're doing, maybe lets their friends know what they're doing, their adversaries, or however that may be. This is the process, if you will, of closing the loop. This is when the receiver comes back to the sender and says, I understood you to say X, Y, Z. Well, what's the problem with that? There is no problem with that, except the sender thought he was saying ABC. And I only use that because those 3 letters, 6 letters are opposite ends of the alphabet. So that's why it's critical for the receiver to give the sender feedback so the sender knows 2 things. Number 1, that my message was received. And number 2, and maybe 2A and 2B, is A being it was received in the way I intended it, or B, it wasn't received the way I intended. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I didn't say what I should have said. I wasn't clear. I used ambiguous words or words that could send a mixed message. I'll give you an example. And I think I may have had this a little bit later in the course, in my lecture tonight, but this is something that happened to me. When I was in the Army, we were on an exercise, and we were asked to stand a courtesy inspection. And so our commander said, well, okay, I'll come in and we'll get everybody, I'll meet with everybody in the morning. We'll just make sure that we're prepared to stand this courtesy inspection on Saturday. This was like Tuesday or Wednesday. And so we had some snafu without going through everything that happened. When I was at breakfast the next morning, our executive officer said to me, did the commander show up this morning? And I said, now I want you to listen to what I said. I said I didn't see him. And so we had a staff meeting every day during this exercise around noon. And so we're sitting there, and executive officer says to commander, he says, I understand that you weren't there this morning. He said, no, that's not right. And so he turned to me and he said, hey, Reed, I said, I thought you said they weren't there. And I said, that's not what I said. I said, I didn't see them. I didn't see them because I was asleep. I'm not going to go into the reasons I was asleep. That's irrelevant to the story. But that's the message. The message I sent was they didn't show up. That wasn't true. But what I said was true too. I didn't see them. That was an absolute, bona fide, truthful statement. Now, you can say it. I'm sure you are, and you may be chuckling to yourselves. You know, I copped a plea on that. Well, that's probably true, but I had to say what I had to say because I thought if I said something else, I would wind up in trouble. Probably wouldn't have, but that was my thought process. So this is what we're talking about, feedback. And that's why it's critical that the receiver tells the sender, I understood you to say this, and I received it. And so everybody knows what's been said and what's been agreed to. All right. What are potential barriers to feedback? Well, possible unintended consequences. A person says, this is what I perceived you to say or understood you to say. And then the person who sent it, maybe that person who sent it's the boss, and the boss gets upset because, well, you didn't understand what I had to say. Poor choice of words. Words that people think are inoffensive turn out to be offensive. And it causes emotions to run out of whack. And this is the last one here, and we'll talk about this. We did talk about it a little bit before in chapter 6, the performance appraisal process. Very difficult thing to do. One reason is that most people don't like to do performance appraisals, and the second part of it is they don't like to give a performance appraisal evaluation person to person. And so the way you minimize this in getting the right feedback you want and getting people to hear what you want them to hear is you just start out by stressing the positive. And then when you get to areas that need work, I'm staying away from the word correction, but need work, need to be improved upon, you focus on the issue, you focus on the task. You don't ever focus on the person. And once you focused on a person, you've defeated what you're trying to do. Pardon me. Now, this next piece we're going to talk about is nonverbal communication. And this is something that we all do all the time and probably means more than, in many cases, than the verbal communication. This is anything we do. It's smiles, it's grimaces, it's raising eyebrows, it's winking, any of those types of things that we're doing to enhance or detract from the conversation. Now, I'll give you another example, and I'll use myself again. When I was at the Five-Sided Puzzle Palace on the Potomac River, we were having a staff meeting one morning, and I had a new boss, relatively new anyway. And so we got involved in this thing with a very small room, and probably 8 or 10 of us in a room sitting around this table. And one of the civilians started to mention something, and I'd heard this thing about 20 times, and I don't want to listen to it anymore. So I did something I should never have done. I turned my back and looked away and didn't pay any attention. And of course, after the meeting was over, the boss said, I want you to stay here. I need to talk to you. So I did. And he said, don't do that anymore. And I said, yes, you're right. I should not have done that. What I should have done was excused myself and said, I need to go someplace and I'll be right back. You have to be careful about that. And this is the next slide, which you can see. Pardon me, figure 11.2. I'm getting over a cold, and I apologize that to you. Figure 11.2 on page 244 is using this nonverbal communication in the way furniture is positioned in the office. Says, I'm the boss, but let's sit down here and talk about it on the left. And then the next one is, I'm the boss, let's talk about it a little bit, not quite as straightforward as the first one is, which says, I'm the boss and I'm not going to listen to you. Or as this other one's, forget I'm the boss, let's talk. So we need to be careful how we send the message. We do that by making these nonverbal, or giving off these nonverbal cues and clues. So if we want the message to be open, we have to assume a position of openness. We don't want to cross our arms and talk to somebody like we're preaching to them if we expect them to take on what we're saying. By the same token, the person listening shouldn't cross his or her arms, because that indicates I'm not interested in paying attention to what you have to say. Interpersonal barriers to communication. Selective listening is exactly what it says. We hear what we want to hear and nothing more. We cut out what we don't want to hear. Now let's face facts here. In any type of communication, there's a lot of stuff that can be said, or excuse me, there's a lot of stuff that is said that's superfluous. It doesn't add to the meaning. That's not the selective part I'm talking about. I'm talking about only hearing what we want to hear. Not the superfluous part, but the guts of it, we only hear what we want to hear. Filtering information, it's not quite the same part of the story. Notice here what it says here. It's only conveying part of the story. It's not, as it says down here, to tell all of the truth. Only going to tell part of it. Physical barriers, we pointed that out with the positioning of the furniture. And that's done quite frequently. I can tell you this is talking about furniture. This comes from another story from the Army, although it's not a personal one. It's a major that I worked with, and he talked about another assignment. He and I had both been assigned to the same place, but not in the same jurisdiction, if you will. And he had to go to these meetings, and there were some civilians there, and he and a friend of his decided, based upon how the chairs were positioned, that this one place was the power place in the room. And so they would always get there to sit there and keep this one senior civilian out of that. Well, she figured it out pretty quickly. She always made sure she got, after that, she always made sure she got there earlier and had the place taken that they considered as the power position. So it's very interesting how people do that. Think about when you go into a meeting, do you sit certain places because you think that they're more important than others, or you sit certain places because you don't want to be bothered, you don't want to be called upon, take an unobtrusive place in the back? Just think about those things and how we do them. Semantic barriers, as the slide says, simply talks about confusing language. We can see this on page 246. And I think the one at the bottom of the page is, we solicit any recommendations that you wish to make, and may be assured we'll take such communication will be given careful consideration. Why can't you just say, please send us your suggestions and we'll respond to you as quickly as possible? That brings us to the next point, the KISS principle. Keep it short and simple, although I've always heard keep it simple, stupid. Say what you want to say it the way it's supposed to be said, and don't add to that. And don't make it, embellish story if you don't need to. This is a very important part of communication. It's something that most of us are not good at. Men are worse than women, and that is active listening. This is, as the slide says, having the ability to get the message that's being sent. And we need to have a good way of listening. Now, I realize a lot of our communication today is via email or text or instant messaging or Twitter or something else. And what I'm talking about here is two-way communication, face-to-face, maybe telephone communication, maybe video teleconference, which this is kind of, but it's making sure that we understand what's being said. The authors give some suggestions here of what we can do for active listening. Listen to the message. Now, that sounds simple, but what I'm saying is listen to the message. It is not listen to all of the flowery words that are kind of surrounding the message. It is listen to the message. What's the focal point of this message? And we can do this by asking if the sender is emphasizing certain things. Listen to his or her voice inflection. Maybe look at the nonverbal cues and clues that person is giving. We want to respond to feelings. What this really means is let the sender know that we are listening, that we're hearing what he or she has to say. Again, going back to something I already said, note all the cues that are being given off. And then what it says here at the end is reflect back. This is paraphrasing. What you should do when you are in a face-to-face conversation and somebody says something to you that's very, very important, not one of these, how are you, how have you been, it's been a long time since I've seen you, et cetera, et cetera. This is important conversation between you and maybe somebody you work with, your boss at work or something else. And just reflect back. What you should say is what I call in other places in the text will call paraphrasing. You go back to this person and say, I understood you to say. And this does a lot of things because it tells the sender that you've actually paid attention and you're putting what the sender said in your own words, but you have not lost the meaning. Now, I like to digress here just for a second and tell you that I like to bring up the Schermerhorn's 10 Steps to Good Listening. I've been using Schermerhorn's textbooks for 18 or so years. And the first course that I taught that I had called Principles of Management, and he had 10 steps to good listening. And I'm just going to give these to you, but I'm going to leave out the first and the last step. And put the other person at ease. Show that you want to listen. Remove any potential distractions. Empathize with the other person. That kind of just reflect back in a way. Listen for feelings. Don't respond too quickly. Be patient. Don't get angry. Hold your temper. Go easy on argument and criticism. And ask questions. Now, I did not give the first tip or the last tip because they're the same. Stop talking. We cannot listen if we talk. And we ought to think about listening being more important than talking because we have 2 ears but one mouth. So listening should be twice as important as talking. All right, let's move on here. Ethnocentrism, we really need to stay away from this. This is that we believe that our culture and our values are superior to anybody else's. We constantly have this issue in world affairs. There are other countries that are guilty are as guilty as the United States is. So we have to think about that. We have to be careful about cross-cultural communication. There are language differences. And we have to be careful about using certain gestures. Everybody doesn't like what we like. Everybody doesn't like to use what we like to use. We in the United States, when we think something is good, we a lot of times like to go like that. Well, in other parts of the world, that's an offensive gesture. And so you have to be careful about that things, not only to other parts of the world, but other people who live in this country, or people who live in this country who emigrated and still are holding on to some of their culture. And parochialism is just as bad as ethnocentrism because it says that our culture is the only way to do things, the only way to do things properly. Now, there are two kinds of cultures. Well, obviously, there's more than two kinds, but when it comes to context, there are a couple of them we have to be careful about. Low context cultures. This is the type of culture that we live in. We're explicit in our speaking and our writing. High context cultures are just the reverse of that. Notice that only part of the message is conveyed either by speaking or writing, and people have to interpret the remaining or infer what the remaining is. We are a low context culture in the United States. Japan is on the high end. There are some channels that we communicate through. Remember, we talked to some about these before. A formal channel, if you're in an organization, we're talking about a formal channel, that's hierarchy, and that type of channel usually flows from the top to the bottom. Informal channel does not have any authority. It may not even have any sanction by the company. And it's things that we call the grapevine, which we're going to get to next, rumor control, and a few other type things we have to consider. And here's the grapevine. It's friends that get together and they talk about things and they pass around information that is unofficial and it has not been sanctioned by the organization. But it can be useful because in many cases, information that people want to get out will get out quicker with these folks. The problem with using grapevine to get out information is you can't control what the grapevine is going to do. So you have to be careful about that. If you want to use the grapevine, you just have to understand that there's pluses and minuses to that, and there may be more minuses than there are pluses. Now, the next thing we're going to come to is called channel richness. We've talked about the channels before, and we're going to get to what they are and how you can see them. This is figure 11.3 that you can see in your text on page 252. And notice that the highest amount of richness comes in face-to-face communication. But it is slow communication because normally speaking, you're only talking to one person or some persons that are attending your meeting or whatever happens to be, and you're not disseminating that perhaps to a wider audience. But that is the channel that's used that has the highest amount of richness, followed by the telephone, and then all the way down to postings, e-bulletins, and reports. You have to determine what channel you want to use and what audience you want to get it to. Obviously, if you want everybody in the workplace, you're going to use something like postings or e-bulletins. Maybe you might use something like email or the intranet because that's going to be a little more immediate than others. It's going to have a little bit more richness. So you have to decide what message is it I want to send, who is it that has to get this message, and then what channel do I want to use, understanding that the wider the channel, down here postings and e-bulletins, the less personal it is. And notice that when you're on this low end, it's one way. And many times, and most often, maybe I should say most often, there is no choice, there is no chance for feedback. And so you have to be careful when you use that type of communication, although it's certainly acceptable. These are the different directions for communication. You can see this on page 253, figure 11.4. Don't really need to talk a lot about this, but we have to be careful about what it is we're doing here. Downward communication obviously is going to come from the folks on high. Look at the things they talk about: strategies, objectives, policies, etc. Upward communication is used to inform those people above us of things that are going on and taking issues to them, perhaps questions and suggestions, etc. Now, there's an issue that I have, and I only want to point this out to you, is that it is not a good idea, at least we preached this when I was in the Army, to give somebody else a problem if you didn't expect them to be able to solve it. So what you should do, and what we used to preach, was it's okay to give your superior a problem, but you ought to give him or her a suggestion of how to solve it at the same time. And then, of course, lateral communication, that's between individuals, between peers, it's between teams. It's done often for coordination, sometimes for other type of things. Organizational communication, this is just following what we just talked about, and I'm not going to discuss that slide anymore because we really talked about what we did before. And again, this next slide goes back to the figure that we have here on page 253, 11.4, and so we don't need to continue to discuss that. These are just how information management or information technologies has helped organizations to do its communication. Improves the speed and capacity and access, encourages sharing. One of the things that has happened, and we talked about this early on in the course, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more as we get into the leadership parts of this of the course, the next few chapters, 12, 13, and some parts of 14, is that by the advent of technology in companies, information sharing, email, or whatever it happens to be, we've been able to, let me take the we, companies have been able to eliminate middle manager positions. One of the big things that middle managers were supposed to do years ago was pass on information. Well, if you have this instant or almost instant capability of communicating with your employees, you don't need so many middle managers any longer. So it's done that way. Sometimes that communication coming in, I like to use the term in shotgun method, it can be a little frustrating for the employee to get because it is impersonal. But no matter how much is cleaned up, we thank you for everything you do, and we appreciate your service and everything else, is still impersonal because your name's not attached to it. So information technology has improved the way we communicate, understanding there's still some issues with it that people grapple with on a day-to-day basis. And we always have to be careful about emails, because one of the reasons we have to be careful about email is, and put yourselves in this category, how many times have you gotten an email that really rankled you, and you felt like you had to respond in kind? And maybe you did. I have to plead guilty about that. I've done that before. And really, all you really should have said was something like received or noted, or I got your message, or something of that nature, instead of going back and making things worse than what they were when you received this message that you thought was like a nastygram, for lack of a better term. So yes, information technology has really improved the way we communicate. There are still some little bit of barriers there we have to be careful about. And we have to acknowledge those and know those. And maybe many times in communication, this type of communication, stop and think once or twice before we fire back. One of the things that people believe erroneously in some cases is using social media, et cetera, protects the sender. People don't know who they are. And I think we found out that just doesn't happen to be the case. Sometimes the way we didn't want to. Well, here are some of the things we already talked about. It's impersonal. We don't get to see the interactions with the other person. We don't get to see his or her facial expressions, any cues or clues that he's using or she's using. And so we lose that ability. And then I think the last part is when we lose that ability, we lose a percentage of our understanding. And what do I mean by that? We don't exactly understand the context in which the message was sent to us. We're missing that piece of it. And so we have to be careful, and we have to do everything we can when we're sending mass communication to make sure that we are not inciting emotions and causing people to get up in arms about something that we think is rather trivial. We have to be careful, and by the way, you'll see this in the case study 11, the poorly informed walrus, about status differences. And this is a barrier. People don't want to give bad news to the boss. And so they'll kind of couch what they want to say. Instead of being honest and above board, they'll say, well, you know, something or other. And this mum effect really follows with that. And that is, we do not want to give bad news, be the bearer of bad tidings. We don't want to be the messenger that gets shot. And so we'll pull our punches. So its status difference really causes a lot of problems. We have to be careful about that. Now, collaborative environments, that's just harnessing things we can do. Notice it talks about boundaryless information flows. Hopefully, collaboration, if it's done in this, fosters more openness, more awareness, and supportive communication, as opposed to a one-way type situation. This is interactional transparency. What do we mean here? Again, this goes back to something we talked about before, openness. Sharing relevant information. That's important. We need to make sure we're sharing relevant information. And just being open. I think if we just use that term, we cover everything that's on this slide. And then I think the last thing is very important. That's, well, we would do that, but I want to cap onto that, and that's the feedback part. If we're being open, we're going to give feedback. If we're not going to be open, we're not going to give feedback. The only thing we're going to say is, yeah, okay, everything was all right, and I understood what you had to say, and call it a day and go home. It's very important. Everybody has to know. Now, that may sound like I'm contradicting myself when you get an angry email of being open. I'm not contradicting myself. It doesn't do anybody any good to fight fire with fire. It doesn't work. If somebody angers you and you fire back at that, now you have not only one angry person, but you have two, and you're never going to solve anything. So it's a little bit different here, and we have to make sure that we're doing what we need to do. These are supportive communication principles. This is just breaking down barriers. That's the biggest thing we have to take away from this. What is it we can do to break down barriers? We find more of these in in place than what we think. Think of at your work, if you can think of it, about a department or small office or whatever it happens to be that kind of tends to be insular. And they don't want to interact with other people, and they're trying to protect their turf. Obviously, their communication is going to be pulled in some respect. They're not going to be as open as they want to be. Not going to be as open as they should be. That's go back to the group think mentality, team think mentality. We don't have any problems. Nobody understands us. We're better than everybody else. So notice this last part down here. Open communication, supportive communication is to break down defensiveness and disconfirmation. And finally, supportive communication principles. Address issues, not people. I can't overemphasize that enough. Get to the point. Don't generalize. Don't use words like never and always. And we do that. I plead guilty to that. We need to be careful about using those kinds of terms. Be personal. That's what this owning the conversation means. And then finally, match words with body language. That's being congruent. Don't say one thing and then look like you're actually, by your words and by your gestures, are saying something different. Well, gentlemen, that brings us to the end of chapter 11. It's not quite as long as chapter 10. Do either of you have any questions?
No, sir.
All right.
No, sir.
Well, I thank you very much for your attendance. As I mentioned, I will have this uploaded tomorrow about 9:30. Takes me about 20 minutes to do that. And if you have any questions, it'll be there for you to look at again. If you have any questions, please make sure to send them to me. I thank you for your attendance, and I look forward to speaking with you again next week. Good night.
Good night. Good night.